we have a show today for those of you that have been keeping track of all the things that are going on in the world, from the Davos, Switzerland meetings that they're having, to the WHO takeover of the sovereignty of the United States, to the shocking reversals happening down in Georgia, the runoffs going on, and it looks like the MAGA posse is up, and people are shocked at the voter turnout. And in Pennsylvania, I mean, they're having like all kinds of chaos now between Muhammad Oz and the guy who's running against him, who's the McConnell favorite. There's so much to cover, but we have a special guest today who is going to help give us some data. We're going to be grounded in the facts of what's really going on. And if you were depressed before, wait till you hear my guest. I'm only kidding. George Barna is one of the authorities that we have when it comes to giving us the lay of the land. Now, this is a man who has written, he's almost like an institution, and you just quote Barna. All he's got to say is Barna says, that's how big he is. He's got more than 50 books addressing cultural trends, leadership, church dynamics, spiritual developments. His expertise is in giving a forensic analysis at the scene of a crime as to what really is going on. But in the data, there's great news that we can come out with. But before we go there, let me just say Zero Hedge came out with an article today, which for those of us that are tracking, 5,000 points the Dow has dropped, which may not be important to you, but it's significant because it's an indicator of the economic vitality of the marketplace. 5,000 drops since January. Zero Hedge, which is a great source for economic forecasting, where I got a lot, frankly, of the data of what to expect with the ballots and what was coming up. These guys are just brilliant. They're secular, incisive researchers. And they're saying that the recession that we're entering into is going to dwarf what happened in 2008, which literally just rocked America, the housing market in every respect. It took us till Donald Trump's presidency to get out of the impact of that. But then the trillions of dollars of irresponsible government spending, Republican and Democrat since then, has flooded the zone with debt. And that money's floating around. The world isn't taking the dollars anymore. And those dollars, that's the reason why you're seeing these inflated, crazy house prices. Like in Texas here, people are coming up, knock on your door. Hey, I'll pay $1 million for your house. You're playing with monopoly money now in some parts of the country. It's scary. But what I'm recommending you do is that you look at, some advisors are telling me, regardless of what your status is, your economic health, you ought to be looking at least 20% of your net worth should be in some form of gold and silver that can leverage itself, because that'll stay in a stored value all over the world. As the dollar kind of like goes woo like that, you peg your money into something which is going up, not down. That's why gold and silver is where people are going. There's various people that are doing this. We've researched and found Birch Gold to be the one place where our people are the most comfortable. They give a 21-page analysis of how to invest, why to invest, where to invest. I want you to get that free information. Go to lancewallnau.com/Birch. lancewallnau.com/Birch. I've had nothing but good reports from everyone that's gone with them. They take time, they talk to you, they explain to you, break it down for you what you need to do. And I'm saying 20% or so of whatever your portfolio is, or whatever you've got, you put it there so you have peace of mind. When the economy is fluctuating, something is rising in value, and gold, silver is stored value. Isn't that right, Mercedes Sparks?
Yes.
Mercedes is our cryptocurrency expert. She's always talking to me about Bitcoin. If I had listened to her when she started talking, my gosh, would I be a rich man now? But oh no, I had to be questioning her like the baby boomer I am. I don't understand this. How can you possibly have money in a digital currency and blockchain, and I can't bite it, I can't hold it. Where's the gold? Where's the silver? But she's been right. And so she's been saying Birch Gold is a smart move, right?
Yeah, I think so. And mainly like a balanced portfolio, because at the end of the day, we're not financial advisors. It's not financial advice we're giving out. Lance isn't giving out. But what we're personally doing is about 20% of my portfolio is going to be gold and silver, mainly silver too, physical. Now is the stock market's, like you said, dropping. So if you've got cash on the sidelines, that's other things to be thinking about. Crypto, something to be thinking about, physical assets. buying businesses right now. So there's a lot of different ways you could be preparing for the coming financial storm. And, even for the people who are out there that say, hey, I'm on a fixed income. I don't have really that much money to be thrown around. I absolutely hear you. And there's even strategies you should be looking at as well. For instance, like a little silver coin, Lance, that's around $25 to $50. And so you could grab one of those, one per month, just something to set aside so that, if the dollar collapses, like you had that word that Chris Reed gave recently, up there with Rick at Morningstar. And so he's saying he saw $50 bills being torn. Mm-hmm. And so you look at stuff like that and you're like, is that something to be thinking about, that the dollar may at some point collapse? So the name of the game is to be prepared. I think that's the number one thing we want to tell people is don't live in fear, but be prepared. That's the big thing.
Right. And remember this, that money is always moving. The money doesn't leave the planet Earth. It just moves into different governments, different pockets, different places. And so the money's there, and a smart strategy is still going to track where the money goes and you tie into it. Also, we have Jonathan and Carl are here. These are our millennial producers over there at the millennial table. And so especially with George today, I'm going to be interested in some of their thoughts because they represent, I think, the demographic that George is studying, which is teens. Well, you're not teenagers anymore, but you youngsters and your worldview has us older folks a little concerned because we discipled you and we didn't do a good job. Evidently, I'll find out. Hey, look at the keyboard over here, people. You see that picture right there? I'm having people all the time saying, Lance, when are you going to give us some music? Did you know that we not only deliver the news, we deliver prophetic analysis of global events, economic and political insights with music? It's a very unique, it's a unique combination of music. So when things get heavy, we hit the keyboards and we sing some of the grand old themes that keep us floating. But right now I want to bring in the professor who is the most quoted Christian personality. I have a quote here somewhere about that, but he is, I believe I was reading this correctly. George Barna is the most quoted person in the Christian church today, named by various media as one of the nation's most influential Christian leaders because of his research and his incisive commentaries. Welcome, George Barna, the professor, the doctor who will not stop it. We love having him on the show. He's teaching at Arizona Christian University when he's not writing and doing research projects and frequently speaking at conferences. George, welcome to the Lance Wallnau Show. We're delighted to have you with us finally, and hope this will be the first of many visits that you're going to have with us. You just completed some very exhaustive research on worldview. Why is worldview the thing you're focusing on as opposed to conversions or other influence in politics? You look at worldview as kind of like the nexus that tells you a lot about where things are going. For those that are new to the subject, why do you focus on biblical worldview?
Well, first of all, let's understand everybody has a worldview. The question isn't, do you have one? It's which one do you have? Because there are many different worldviews you can have. What difference does a worldview make? All the difference. Because a worldview basically is the intellectual, spiritual, emotional, and moral filter that we use to make sense of the world and to figure out how to respond to it, how we want to be positioned in life, what kind of impact we want to have. Every decision that we make every day of our life comes through our worldview. It influences every decision. So particularly for a program with an audience like yours, Lance, where you're looking at what's going on in the world and how do we change it so that it truly honors God. Well, that all comes back to worldview. If you don't like the way the world is, it's because of the decisions that people are making. That's what's creating that environment out there that we're living in. And so if we want to be influential people, we need to have the same mindset as the God of creation. That's what's known as a biblical worldview. It's one of many different worldviews. And what we find out of our research is that fewer and fewer people have a biblical worldview. We know that a worldview develops. First, it starts developing when a child is 15 to 18 months of age, and it's almost fully formed by the age of 13. During the teens and 20s, it gets refined, it gets articulated better. We figure out how to apply it more effectively. But then in our mid to late 20s and beyond, we essentially become evangelists for that worldview that we've landed on. So worldview is absolutely critical. We know that in America today, only 6% of adults have a biblical worldview. We know that only 37% of pastors of Christian churches across the country have a biblical worldview. Only 2% of the parents raising those pre-teenagers have a biblical worldview. So it is really a crisis in America.
Well, all right. So when you talk about the only 30-some% of pastors, that's going to shock a lot of people because we expect that the pastors, at least, are biblically literate. So where is the biggest aha for you in terms of pastors? What don't they believe that you would think a Christian pastor would believe? What's the big deviation there?
Yeah, Lance, when we study worldview, we ask people 54 different questions, not only about what they believe, but about how they apply those beliefs in their life. Because a worldview is a combination of beliefs and behavior. You do what you believe. So a lot of people tell me they believe something, but then their actions betray that. They don't really believe it. They know that's the right thing to say. So as we look at pastors, what we know is that there are a lot of different beliefs and behaviors we're studying, but the areas in which they're weakest are the area of Bible, truth, and morality, meaning that we find that they believe the Bible is a good and helpful book. They don't necessarily believe that all of it's true. They don't necessarily believe that there is such a thing as absolute moral truth. They are often likely to believe that an individual has to look inward and determine what their feelings are saying to them. And we also know that when it comes to moral choices, that pastors don't always make the right choices in terms of sexuality, in terms of life and death, in terms of all kinds of relational choices that they have to make.
So when we talk about for instance, the role of the Scripture in the Bible, there might be some argument I can see where someone says a translation is off here or off there, it's been transcribed, etc. But are you saying that there's like 70% of pastors don't think that the scriptures that they're handling, like the book right here, that they would say that this is a combination of man and God? Or is that what you're saying, that they don't really believe that the Bible is a trustworthy guide for doctrine?
Yes and no. I quibble because I'm a numbers guy with the 63%. 63% of Christian pastors do not have a biblical worldview. Now, remember, because we're asking many different questions, you don't have to get them all in concert or in harmony with biblical teaching. But the way that we look at it is at least 4 out of every 5 belief-oriented questions and at least 4 out of every 5 behavioral questions should be in harmony with the scriptures. So that doesn't necessarily mean that 63% of pastors reject the Bible as God's true, inerrant, reliable, relevant word to humanity. But a large share of them do. I think it's about 4 out of 10 of them do. So, and you also have to look at different types of churches. Evangelical churches, you've got 51% of pastors who have a biblical worldview. So a little bit higher than the national norm, but not nearly as high as you would expect with churches where they claim as part of their doctrine that the Bible is the true word of God. So yeah, it gets a little bit confusing, but the key element here is that we can't always trust pastors or churches or parents or pretty much anything to be biblically in sync. What we do have to do is throw out our assumptions and be wise consumers. Actually know, what does our church teach? What does it believe? What's happening, particularly in the children's ministries? Because when we looked at the different pastors across the country, we found that only 12% of children's pastors and youth pastors have a biblical worldview. So it's even worse among those who we're entrusting our children to. So we've got to be very cautious and wise.
Wow. So if I'm hearing you correctly, then as you go down from pastor to the children's church and to the teens, it just decreases in terms of that. And where would that, like, I know this is hard to do because I'm asking specific data, but there's a spectrum of it. But so would that mean that a lot of teenagers are being taught that sexual purity, sexual fidelity, that the definition of sexual practice, etc., is one man, one woman, and you wait till marriage to have sex? Would that be something which you're saying teen ministries are not getting?
Teen and children. Yeah, in fact, that's something that we look at in the survey. And so we do know that a large majority of children's pastors and youth pastors do not teach it's one man, one woman. A large majority of children's and youth pastors do not teach that you should wait until you're married to have sexual intercourse with someone. What they would teach is that if you feel as if you love that person, if you feel as if you would like to be with that person for a prolonged period of time, and sexual activity together would make you happy, God would want that for you. That's the kind of teaching that's going on.
Wow. So is there, in all of the data that you come across, is there a way of reversing any of that in terms of, is there a bright spot there anywhere? For instance, I know that I've been told that the pro-life movement has actually a lot of millennials that are kind of repulsed at the idea, as much as you see them as activists, with the pro-choice and progressives, that there's a high number of millennials that are not pleased at all with the thought of terminating life at 9 months or 8 months pregnancy. Are there any trends that you're seeing that are in line with ultimately what we would hope would be a Christian worldview or Christian values, if not worldview, in youth?
Yeah, and let me say a couple things. First of all, you use the term Christian worldview, which millions of people do. We don't use that. We specifically say biblical worldview. And the reason for that is that in our testing, what we found is that in the United States today, the term Christian no longer means a connection with Jesus Christ. What it now means is good people, well-meaning people, people with good intentions. And so when somebody says they have a Christian worldview, what we discovered is that by and large, what that means is that they have a worldview wherein they're trying to be a good person, but not necessarily a person who knows the scriptures, embraces the scriptures, is trying to live out biblical principles consistently. So we're very careful about that term. In terms of, is there hope? Yes, there's a lot of hope, because we know that when we look at the United States population, we've got about 15 million adults who have a biblical worldview. A lot of them are grandparents. A lot of them are individuals that we call sage cons. These are spiritually active, governance engaged, conservative Christians. You say, why would you bring that into the conversation? Because we found that sage cons, who by definition are the kind of people who believe that their faith is supposed to invade every element of their life, politics, finance, family, education, community, service, all of these things and more. They believe that their faith is not just a set of beliefs, it's meant to be a set of practices influenced by those beliefs that we get directly from the Bible. Sage cons are actually more likely than pastors in America to have a biblical worldview. So there are these pockets of people across the country who get it and who want to be able to share that with other individuals and raise up true disciples of Jesus. So yes, there is hope. I would say that we just may have to look in different places for it than we expected.
All right, so when you say 8% of the adult population, I know that I can only expect so much of you to just off the top of your head have numbers, but can you give me a ballpark as to what you mean by adult population? Is that 200 million?
Yeah, the adult population in America right now is 255 million.
255 million. So if it's 8% of the population, then it's around like 20 million or so.
Yep.
But
That's how many sage cons there are.
Yeah, sage cons.
Right. Yes.
Well, that's a good number. I mean, if I have 20 million, and you know what my theory on that is that the sage cons are news consumers. They're not just interested in the church. Matter of fact, their church affiliation may be variable, but they listen to news. They're probably in the, Tucker Carlson monologue audience, every night. They're the ones that I know anyway. They're listening to War Room with Steve Bannon. They're probably heavily politically engaged. Probably some 90% of them are literate regarding the conservative movement with Donald Trump and what he represented. So 20 million adults that are informed and mobilized and caring can be a substantial influence in evangelical circles, I'm sure, if they're properly mobilized. But there is no organization for SageCons, is there? They're just kind of an ubiquitous mass that we don't have a SageCon database anywhere, do we?
No, but I'm working with an organization right now to try to put that together for the very kind of purposes that you're thinking about.
Well, I knew if anyone was up to it, it'd be George Barna. That's why I wanted to bring it up. That's glad. Well, Mercedes, what kind of a question do you have for our guest?
Yeah, I was wondering, so if the biblical worldview is not the dominant worldview, what is the dominant worldview amongst the other 240 million people out there? What is that?
Yeah, it's actually an interesting phenomenon. When we started doing this research, we're the only ones that have ever done a national survey trying to figure out what is the dominant worldview of Americans. We were expecting that postmodernism and secular humanism and Marxism, all of these things that we hear about a lot, would be the dominant worldviews. We found that not to be the case. The dominant worldview turns out to be something called syncretism. Syncretism simply means that people are picking and choosing elements from many different worldviews. They're not willing to limit themselves to a particular worldview, whether it's a biblical worldview, Marxism, Eastern mysticism, postmodernism, whatever it is. So what we found is that most people actually have some elements of postmodernism that they buy into. They have some elements of Marxism that they buy into. They have some elements of biblical theism or a biblical worldview that they buy into. And what they do is they take all these disparate elements and they blend them together into a unique worldview that they feel comfortable with. Now, when we examine the totality of that particular worldview for an individual, we often find that there are contradictory elements embedded within it. It's like you can't believe this element from postmodernism because it contradicts this element from biblical theism, and they both contradict this element from Eastern mysticism. How do you reconcile that? And we found that most people say, I never thought about that, and I'm not really worried about it. So they just go on with what makes them comfortable, with what enables them to keep moving forward, rather than having to do the more difficult work of trying to think through a grand narrative, if you will, the big picture of how life really works, and choosing one particular narrative.
Where is the role of academia in all this? Because you're teaching at a university, and it strikes me that a considerable amount of the reshaping of American thinking is happening amongst college-age students and kids that are in schools, and they're getting discipled to a great extent by the rabbis that are in the classroom. I know this isn't necessarily what your data is measuring, but what's your sense viscerally on the influence of academia on the changing syncretism in American beliefs?
Yeah, actually, that is something we've been focusing on. And here at Arizona Christian University, when I came here, my first project I was given was to develop a worldview evaluation tool for all of our students. So every student at Arizona Christian University every year takes this same inventory to determine what their worldview is. Because as professors, we need to understand, are we moving them closer to consistent biblical truth? And that helps us to know where we're doing it well, where we're falling short, and we can make changes in our academic regimen accordingly. But we're the only university in the world, as far as I know, that does that. But you're exactly right. Marxists are having a heyday, and particularly in state universities across the nation, beating up young students who have never thought about these things. Their parents never thought about these things. Obviously, their pastors aren't thinking about these things. And so, yes, they're being beaten up to think about, here's the proper way to think about it. You want to pass my course? This is how you'll think about it. And so they're buying into all of these errant worldviews that are being thrust upon them. Arizona Christian University is a worldview development school. We're very upfront about that. And the worldview that you're going to be taught is the appropriate one, is a biblical worldview. But in the course of that, you'll be taught what these other worldviews say. Because when you're given arguments from students or professors or pastors or teachers from elsewhere, the media, the biggest teacher of worldview in America today is arts and entertainment media. Mm-hmm. I know that from the research. I've been watching that, tracking that for over 20 years. And here's an interesting thing. What we're finding is that today's young children are not relying upon their parents to teach them a worldview. Now, they're searching desperately for a worldview to latch onto, because remember what a worldview is. It's your decision-making filter. You're making decisions all the time. And so you need to develop that worldview as quickly as possible. Children look at their parents. They hear their parents say one thing, but do another thing. And so the clue that they have is, my parents are just as confused as I am. And so they're looking elsewhere for consistency. And when they watch a movie, when they play a video game, when they listen to pop music, when they watch a television series, they're given a consistent worldview message. And so that's where they're being trained, is primarily through the media. And then schools are complementing that with what they're teaching.
I see an opportunity here. When I was looking at an Elon Musk tweet recently, where he progressive tweets that he had. One was a graph which showed him as a centrist, and the right, well, I'll do it opposite here for TV. The right wing is over here, and he's here, and then he's still a centrist, but his point is that the left keeps on moving further and further and further to the left, which makes a centrist look like a conservative. And he's saying he hasn't moved. And you've got Joe Rogan, popular, iconic, podcasters that we track within our industry. And they're similarly, they're centrist, but the left is continuing to move in such a way that they're finding themselves looking more and more conservative. Is it possible that the radicalizing of the universities and even the entertainment culture itself, being under the influence of thought leaders that are coming out of these gates of influence, then realizing they're not keeping pace really where America is historically? There may not be a strong biblical worldview, but there's a sense of what normal looks like, and that normal is becoming attacked to a great many Americans. I think it feeds to a spiritual moment when Americans maybe don't know what it is that their biblical roots are departing from, but they're uncomfortable with the direction that things are moving in. And therefore, there's an openness to re-examine what are the core beliefs that we have. I think socialism is an example where a lot of students that romanticize the idea of Marxism and socialism, the moment they come to a place like, I guess, Arizona Christian University, you guys start to drill down on that. And the aha is, actually, there's greater economic freedom, greater opportunity, greater progress for humanity when people are free to be able to use their skills and own the products of their own creativity versus someone else owning it and governing them. Is what I'm saying making sense from the academic world, the data you're looking at?
It is. And let me put it back in a spiritual context as well, because we've been studying this. How does discipleship work effectively in a culture such as ours today? And what we've discovered is that we've transitioned as a culture away from what churches typically do, which is the transmission of information, to now a culture where it's about relationships more than information. And so if I can build a relationship with someone who may think completely different things than me, but they trust me because they know that I honor them, I respect them, I care about them, I want to continue a relationship with them. Over the course of multiple conversations, I have the opportunity to bring up some of these very kinds of issues. And without taking out my Bible and hitting them over the head with it and saying, let me tell you the only right way to think. If instead I can take a Socratic approach, or some would say this is the approach that Jesus took, where he asked people questions. And Paul did this all the time, so, particularly Acts 17, when he went to Mars Hill in Athens, and he was meeting with the philosophers of the day who believed very different things, much like our culture today. And he didn't just say, you guys are a bunch of idiots if you believe that. He said, well, tell me why you believe that. And then they told him, and then he said, that's interesting. Here's what I believe. And the philosophers there said, wow, we haven't heard that. We don't understand it. Can you come back and we'll talk some more about it? Those kinds of Socratic dialogical moments are what give us the opportunity to bring the scripture back to the forefront in our culture. Not necessarily saying, I believe it because that's what the Bible says, but giving the underlying reasons for why the Bible teaches us this. Knowing that from a biblical perspective, for instance, success is consistent obedience to God. Why? Why would that make a person successful? And being able to roll that out for somebody rather than simply saying, yeah, success is whatever makes me happy, because we know that doesn't work.
Okay, so you used the word Socratic. Break that out. I think I know what you mean by that, but what is the Socratic method?
Yeah, Socrates was considered a great teacher, not just because he knew a lot, but he was able to persuade a lot of students to believe the right things because his method was asking them questions. They would bring up a topic and he would ask them, what do you think about this topic? And all the students would get up and pontificate a little bit and say, well, that's interesting that Bill over here thinks this. Let's dive a little deeper into that. What brought you there, Bill? And Bill would pontificate a little more, and how proud that the teacher is using him as an example. And then Socrates would begin to ask a series of questions about, okay, this is what you think. This is how you got there. Let me ask you about the support structure under that particular belief. And Socrates would continue to ask questions. And generally what you find is that Bill or other students or other people haven't thought very deeply about why they believe what they believe. And so when you begin to ask questions about that, their whole belief system begins to unravel, which then gives us the opportunity through questions and dialogue, talking back and forth about what are the options, what are the implications, what are the applications, to begin to put that belief system back together so that it actually makes sense. That's what a Socratic approach is. Question after question after question, and people eventually come to answers because of the questions.
I'm loving everything that George is saying here in the conversation we're having, but I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold off on the whole conversation, because I don't want to rush this. And George, if you don't mind, we'll keep you for tomorrow. We'll do part 2 of this powerful dialogue about what's really happening in America, what we need to know about that, and then what we can do that makes a difference. It's the awakening that is taking place with George Barna giving us the details from his latest research. Don't miss tomorrow.
Thanks for listening to this Lance Wallnau broadcast. If you enjoyed today's show, make sure to subscribe and share the episode. See you tomorrow.
When I was in an island with Annabelle for vacation, we couldn't get Netflix, we couldn't get Amazon, we were really stuck. Loved the island. Then I found out about ExpressVPN with 94 countries with high-speed connections. And I realized that with one click, I could actually get access to servers and stuff outside of the limitation of where I was. But then I also discovered something. When you're going online, you're being exposed. We're finding out stories all the time about people being doxxed. I mean, it's a political agenda to find out personal information about you and expose it. But whether you're shopping or whether you're just connecting at a cafe or whether you're at the office, if you want to protect your identity, what you're doing, the websites you go to, the conversations you have, whether it's on a phone, a tablet, a computer, or just through a router, no matter where you are, you can expand the number of options you've got for what you get access to, and you could totally insulate and protect yourself with online privacy, security, and the best state-of-the-art encryption services. It's all through expressvpn.com/Lance. You go there and you're going to get 30, 60, or 90 days worth of free training. I guess it's a money-back guarantee and a trial. But I'm talking about lightning-quick connectivity, multiple locations, the ability to go to all kinds of sites, regardless of the limitation of the local government or the local place. 160 locations in 94 countries, and all of it secure. No one can track you. That's what I love about ultra-fast, totally secure, global VPN. So go to, once again, expressvpn.com/Lance. Do what I do. Do what my staff does, do what my friends do, and protect your privacy and expand